The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken promises, and somewhere between the judge's gavel and my birth mother's trembling hands, I realized I felt nothing at all. She was crying. Real tears, the kind that smudge mascara and make your shoulders shake. The kind designed to move hearts, to soften resolve, to remind everyone that she was, after all, just a fragile woman who had made mistakes. The gallery whispered. My half-siblings shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and I simply stood there, my spine straight, my expression untouched by the theatre unfolding before me. Your Honour, my lawyer said, her voice cutting through the manufactured grief like a blade through silk. My client wishes to make a statement. I stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, just inevitable, like dawn after a long night. My birth mother, Linda, looked up at me then, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate, searching my face for the daughter she thought she knew. The daughter who would forgive, who would understand, who would crumble under the weight of maternal guilt and familial obligation. She didn't find her. That girl had died 23 years ago in a previous life, and I had learned not to resurrect ghosts. I have nothing to say to you, I told her, my voice steady as stone. Not anymore. The words landed like a death sentence, and in the silence that followed, I could hear my heartbeat. Calm, measured, victorious. Growing up, I believed love was supposed to hurt. My earliest memories are fragmented things. My birth mother's apartment, with its peeling wallpaper, the way she'd look at me with something between resentment and obligation, the endless parade of her boyfriends who learned my name only to forget it within weeks. I was 7 when she remarried, a wealthy businessman named Robert Thorne, and suddenly, overnight, I went from being an inconvenient reminder of her past to being the scholarship case in a family of pedigree. Robert had 2 daughters from his first marriage, Isabella, who was 12 and treated me like a servant, and Victoria, who was 9 and learned cruelty from her sister like other children learn piano. They had everything: designer clothes, private tutors, riding lessons, summer homes. I had hand-me-downs and the smallest room in the East Wing, the one the maids used before Robert's wealth made live-in staff unnecessary. But none of that compared to what my birth mother did. She erased me, slowly, methodically, like an artist painting over a mistake. In family photos, I stood at the edge, always slightly out of frame. At dinner parties, she introduced Isabella and Victoria as my daughters, and me, if at all, as Robert's stepdaughter, which was a lie that cut deeper than the truth. She never corrected anyone who assumed I was adopted. She never defended me when Isabella accused me of stealing her jewellery, even though we both knew who the real thief was. I learned to make myself small, to speak only when spoken to excel quietly because achievements made me visible and visibility invited punishment. The worst part wasn't the neglect. It was the moments when she'd pull me aside, her grip tight on my arm, her voice low and venomous. You're making this family look bad. Can't you just try to fit in? Can't you be more like them? Like them. Less like myself. Less like her blood, apparently, though that hadn't mattered when she'd given birth to me. I was 17 when I discovered the documents in Robert's study. Adoption papers, dated 3 months after their marriage. Papers that would have given me his name, his protection, his legal recognition as his child. They'd been drawn up, but never filed. I found them by accident, looking for stamps for a college application. My hand shook as I read them. Robert's signature was there, confident and clear. The space for Linda's signature was empty. She had refused. She'd told him no. And she'd never told me they existed. That night, I confronted her. I was young, still foolish enough to believe in explanations, in reasons that might absolve her. Why? I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to control it. Why wouldn't you let him adopt me? She looked at me with cold eyes. Because you're not his. You're a reminder of my mistakes, and I won't saddle him with that permanently. Be grateful he lets you stay here at all. 2 months later, I died. It was a car accident. Black ice, a curve taken too fast, the universe's cruel sense of timing. I was on my way back from a college interview, riding with Isabella, who'd offered to drive me in a moment of uncharacteristic generosity. I should have known better. Should have seen the malice in her smile, should have questioned why she'd suddenly been kind. She swerved deliberately. I saw it in her eyes in the rearview mirror, that flash of decision. The car spun, glass shattered, and in those final moments, as the world tumbled and pain exploded through my body, I saw her unbuckle her seatbelt with practiced ease, saw the airbag she'd disabled on my side, saw the truth of how expendable I'd always been. I died on a cold January road, and no one mourned me. My birth mother cried at the funeral, beautiful, photogenic tears that made her look sympathetic rather than culpable. Isabella walked with a cane for 3 months and told everyone I'd been driving, that I'd lost control, that she'd tried to save me. Robert paid for the funeral and never spoke my name again. I was erased completely, as if I'd never existed at all. I woke up on my 16th birthday. The morning light slanted through my bedroom window, the small room in the east wing, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I knew this day. I remembered it with perfect, agonizing clarity. This was the birthday Linda forgot. The birthday Isabella accidentally spilled red wine on my only good dress. The birthday Victoria told her friends at school I was the maid's daughter. This was also the day I met Evelyn Thorne, Robert's first wife, the woman who would change everything, though I didn't know it yet in that first life. I sat up slowly, my hands gripping the sheets. My body was 16 again, but my mind held 23 years of memories, of pain, of death. I looked at my hands, young, unmarked by the years of struggle that had defined my first life, and in that moment, staring at my own reflection in the vanity mirror across the room, I made a choice. I would not be a victim again. This time, I would be different, not louder. Noise attracted predators, not angrier. Anger made you reckless. I would be colder, smarter. I would learn to play the game they'd been playing all along, and I would play it better. I had died once already. I had nothing left to fear. The first change was subtle. I stopped trying to please them. When Linda forgot my birthday that afternoon, just as I knew she would, I didn't cry. I didn't sulk. I simply smiled and said, "That's all right. I prefer not to celebrate anyway." The words threw her off balance. She'd been prepared for tears, for the usual guilt trip that made her feel both powerful and burdened. My indifference unnerved her. When Isabella appeared at dinner with red wine in hand, that same malicious glint in her eye, I moved my water glass in front of my dress before she could trip. The wine splashed across the tablecloth instead. I apologized for the placement of my glass, so convincingly that Robert believed it was an accident, and Isabella's plan dissolved into nothing. And when Victoria whispered her lie to her friends at school, I was ready. I'd already befriended the school librarian, Mrs. Patterson, a woman who knew everyone's secrets and respected quiet intelligence. When Victoria's story started spreading, Mrs. Patterson casually mentioned to the right people that she'd met my birth mother at a parent-teacher conference, shutting down the rumours before they could root. I collected these small victories like stones, building a foundation they couldn't see. But the real transformation began the day I met Evelyn Thorne properly for the first time. again. In my first life, I'd encountered her at a charity gala that Robert hosted. She was elegant and self-possessed, a venture capitalist who'd built an empire in tech investments after her divorce from Robert. We'd spoken briefly, cordially. She'd been kind to me in that distant way wealthy people are kind to those they don't expect to see again. This time, I sought her out deliberately. I researched her company, studied her investments, learned everything I could about her business philosophy. Then, I waited for the charity gala. Robert hosted it every year on the same date, and I made sure I was positioned exactly where she'd be when she arrived. "You're Robert's stepdaughter," she said when we were introduced, her handshake firm, her gaze assessing. "Maya," I replied, "and you're the woman who turned a $50,000 inheritance into a $200 million portfolio in 15 years. Your investment in ClearPath Technologies was brilliant." Her eyebrow rose. 16-year-olds didn't usually discuss venture capital at charity galas. "You've done your homework." "I'm interested in building something that can't be taken away," I said, and I let her see the steel behind my young face. She studied me for a long moment, and I knew she saw something familiar, perhaps her own younger self, fighting for space in rooms that didn't want her. "Call my office Monday," she finally said. "I might have an internship opportunity for someone with your initiative." Isabella, watching from across the room, looked livid. Victoria's mouth hung open. "And Linda?" Linda looked confused, unable to understand how her forgotten, erased daughter had just secured an audience with one of the most powerful women in the city. I didn't explain. I didn't gloat. I simply smiled and thanked Evelyn, then excused myself to get some air, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. In this life, I would be the architect of my own fortune. The internship with Evelyn's firm started that summer, and it was brutal in the best way. She didn't coddle me, didn't make allowances for my age. She gave me real work, research projects, market analysis, due diligence on potential investments. She expected excellence, and when I delivered, she nodded and gave me more. I learned everything. How to read financial statements, how to spot promising startups, how to negotiate, how to build networks that mattered. But more than that, I learned how to be untouchable. Evelyn had mastered the art of being professionally warm and personally impenetrable. She had allies, not friends. Respect, not love. She'd built her empire alone after Robert, after a marriage that had tried to diminish her. "Never let them see you need anything," she told me once, late in the office when we were reviewing a pitch deck. "The moment you need something, you've given them power over you." I absorbed her lessons like a plant absorbing sunlight, and slowly I began to build something they couldn't take from me. I opened a bank account in my own name, something I hadn't thought to do in my first life. I saved every penny from my internship, every birthday check from distant relatives, every dollar I could earn tutoring younger students. I kept my grades perfect, not for family approval, but because scholarships would be my ticket to independence. At home, I became a ghost. Polite, present when required, but emotionally absent. When Linda criticized me, I nodded and said, "I'll work on that," with no intention of changing. When Isabella tried to sabotage my college applications, just as she had in my first life, I'd already submitted backup copies through Mrs. Patterson, who'd agreed to serve as an alternative reference. They couldn't touch me, because I'd stopped giving them access to the parts of me that mattered. But the real shift came on my 18th birthday, the day that, in my first life, Robert had told me I needed to start contributing to the household if I wanted to keep living there. The day Linda had suggested I might consider community college instead of university to save money. This time, I was ready. The family gathered in the dining room, and I could see the script playing out in Linda's mind. She'd position it as concern, as practicality. Robert would nod along, reluctant but convinced. Isabella and Victoria would smirk, watching another piece of my future crumble. But before Linda could speak, I stood. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I have accepted a full scholarship to Northwestern University. All expenses covered, including housing. I'll be moving out in August." The silence was delicious. Robert looked surprised, but pleased. A full scholarship reflected well on his household. Isabella's face went pale. Victoria looked to her mother, confused. And Linda? Linda looked like I'd struck her. "You didn't discuss this with her?" she said, her voice tight. "There was nothing to discuss," I replied. "I'm 18. The scholarship covers everything. I won't be a burden on the family finances." I saw the calculation in her eyes. She wanted to object, to maintain control, but there was no reasonable argument. A full scholarship was exactly what she'd always said she wanted for me, to not cost them anything. "Well," Robert said, raising his glass, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Congratulations, Maya. That's quite an achievement." I thanked him and excused myself, feeling Linda's eyes boring into my back as I left. She cornered me later, I knew. She tried to reassert control, to make me feel guilty, to remind me of everything she'd done for me. But I'd stopped listening to her long ago. Later that night, alone in my room, I received a text from Evelyn. "Congratulations on Northwestern. Keep me updated on your progress. You have a job waiting when you graduate if you want it." I stared at the message for a long moment. In my first life, I'd had nothing. No support, no prospects, no safety net. In this life, I'd built something they couldn't take away. A future that belonged only to me. And I was just getting started. University was freedom. For the first time in both my lives, I existed in a space where Linda's opinions didn't reach, where Isabella couldn't sabotage me, where I could simply be myself without constantly defending my right to exist. I thrived. Double major in business and computer science, internships every summer, some with Evelyn's firm, others with companies I wanted to learn from. I built a network of people who valued competence over family connections. I dated casually, but never seriously, having learned that vulnerability was a luxury I couldn't afford. And I watched from a distance as the Thorne family dynamics shifted without me there to serve as their scapegoat. Isabella, without me to blame, began making mistakes that couldn't be hidden. A DUI, a failed semester at her expensive private college, a series of boyfriends who were obviously using her for her father's money. Robert, forced to see his daughter's flaws without me to contrast her against, grew disappointed. Victoria, always the follower, spiraled too. She'd built her identity around being better than me, and with me gone, she had no foundation. She dropped out of college twice, moved back home, drifted. Linda tried to hold them together, but without me to unite them in shared disdain, they turned on each other. The texts I received from Robert, we'd maintained a cordial relationship despite everything, painted a picture of a household unravelling. I felt nothing watching it happen. Not satisfaction, not pity, just the cold understanding that they'd built their family dynamics on a faulty foundation, and foundations like that always crumble eventually. But the real revelation came in my junior year, when Evelyn called me into her office for a meeting that had nothing to do with work. "I need to tell you something," Evelyn said, her usually composed face showing something I'd rarely seen. Hesitation. "It's about your birth. About Linda." I set down my coffee carefully. "I'm listening." "When Robert and I were married, Linda worked as his assistant. This was before you were born, 20 years ago." Evelyn's voice was measured, but I could hear the old anger beneath it. She got pregnant deliberately. Robert was wealthy. I was focused on my career, and she saw an opportunity. My heart rate remained steady, but my mind raced. This was new information, something I hadn't known in my first life. Robert wanted to do the right thing, Evelyn continued. He offered child support, involvement. Linda refused unless he left me and married her. When he wouldn't, she disappeared for 2 years. By the time she came back, you were a toddler, and she'd realised being a single mother wasn't the lucrative arrangement she'd imagined. So she came back, I said quietly, pieces clicking into place. She came back after Robert and I divorced for unrelated reasons. She positioned herself as a changed woman, a devoted mother who'd made mistakes. She'd kept your existence secret from him until then. He didn't even know he had a daughter until you were 3. I processed this carefully. DNA test? Of course. Robert insisted you were his. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression fierce. But here's what you need to know, Maya. There's a trust. Robert set it up when you were 4, before he married Linda. A substantial trust that was supposed to transfer to you at age 21. Linda was named as trustee until then. My blood went cold. Supposed to? Linda convinced Robert to modify it. She told him you didn't need it, that it would make you entitled, that she'd manage it better as part of the family assets. She had him change the terms. The trust wouldn't transfer until age 25, and only if you maintained a close family relationship. A clause so vague it was essentially unenforceable, but scary enough to control you with. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. $5 million, plus accumulated interest. It's nearly $7 million now. $7 million. My entire life I'd been told I was a burden, a cost, a charity case. And all along I'd had money, my money from my father, that Linda had been controlling. There's more, Evelyn said grimly. I've been investigating Linda's finances. She's been pulling money from that trust for years, claiming it was for your expenses. Private school tuition, except you went to public school. Medical expenses, that were never incurred. College funds, that were never used because you won a scholarship. She's embezzled at least $2 million from your trust. The room seemed to tilt, not from shock, I was beyond shock, but from the sheer, calculated cruelty of it. Linda hadn't just neglected me. She'd stolen from me while making me feel grateful for the scraps from her table. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Evelyn's smile was sharp. Because you turn 21 in 6 months. Because Robert asked me to review the trust documents. He's finally seeing Linda for what she is, after watching her enable Isabella and Victoria's disasters. And because, Maya, you deserve to know what's yours. But more than that, she slid a folder across the desk. You deserve to have the power to decide what happens next. I opened the folder. Inside were financial documents, evidence of the embezzlement, legal opinions, contact information for attorneys who specialised in trust litigation. You could sue, Evelyn said. You could press criminal charges, or you could simply claim your trust at 21 and walk away. The choice is yours. I looked at the documents, at the evidence of Linda's betrayal laid out in black and white, and I felt something cold and bright crystallise in my chest. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was something purer. This was clarity. I'm going to need some time, I said, to plan this carefully. Evelyn nodded, understanding in her eyes. Take all the time you need. But Maya, whatever you decide, I've got your back. For the first time since my rebirth, I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having someone truly on my side. I spent the next 6 months planning with the precision of a military campaign. First, I documented everything. Every text message, every email, every interaction with my birth family. I hired a forensic accountant, paid for with money I'd saved from my internships, to trace exactly where my trust funds had gone. The results were damning. Linda had used my money for Isabella's tuition, for Victoria's horse, for a beach house in the Hamptons, for jewellery, for cars. She'd lived off my inheritance while treating me like I was costing her something. Second, I secured my future. I accepted Evelyn's job offer, negotiated a starting salary that would make me independent, found an apartment in the city. I transferred all my important documents to a safe deposit box Linda couldn't access. I changed my phone number and gave the new one only to people I trusted. Third, I graduated summa cum laude, with honours, with job offers from 3 major firms. I chose Evelyn's because loyalty mattered, and she'd earned mine. And finally, on my 21st birthday, I filed a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement and fraud. Not just against Linda, against Robert too, for negligence in his oversight, though I knew Evelyn would help him settle quietly if he cooperated. But Linda had no way out. The lawsuit was filed on a Friday. By Monday morning, it was all over the social pages. The wealthy family, the embezzling stepmother, because that's how Linda had always positioned herself publicly, and now it trapped her. The stolen inheritance. It had everything the press loved. Linda called me 17 times that first day. Then Robert called. Then Isabella, then Victoria. I answered none of them. Instead, I released a carefully worded statement through my attorney. I'm disappointed that legal action was necessary to secure what was rightfully mine. I hope this serves as a reminder that family relationships should be built on truth, not financial exploitation. I have no further comment at this time. Professional, measured, devastating. The court date was set for 3 months later, and I knew Linda would fight. She'd claim misunderstanding, claim she'd always meant to pay it back, claim I was being ungrateful and vindictive. She'd cry in court, play the victim, try to make me look like a cruel daughter turning on her struggling mother. But I had evidence. Bank records, receipts, testimonies from household staff who'd witnessed the disparity in how she treated her stepdaughters versus me. And I had something else. I had Evelyn Thorne sitting in the gallery, a visible reminder that powerful people believed my story. The day of the hearing, I wore a navy suit, professional, understated, the opposite of victim. I braided my hair simply. No jewellery except small stud earrings. I looked like what I was, a serious young woman who'd been wronged and was seeking justice, not revenge. Linda wore Chanel and pearls, playing the wealthy matron card. Isabella and Victoria sat behind her, both looking uncomfortable. Robert sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, which said everything about how the family alliances had shifted. The proceedings were dry and technical, testimony about trust law, about fiduciary responsibility, about financial records. My attorney was methodical, building the case brick by brick. Linda's attorney tried to paint me as estranged, as bitter, as exaggerating typical family tensions. Then it was my turn to testify. "Miss Thorne," my attorney said. And yes, I'd legally changed my name to Thorne, Robert's name, the name Linda had once prevented him from giving me. "Can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" I looked directly at Linda as I spoke. She gave birth to me, but she was never my mother. Linda flinched. The gallery murmured. "She treated me as an inconvenience," I continued, my voice level. "She erased me from family photos. She forgot my birthdays. She refused to allow my father to adopt me legally, keeping me in a permanent state of illegitimacy while using my trust fund, money my father set aside for my future, to fund the lifestyle of her stepdaughters, whom she openly preferred." "Objection," Linda's attorney called. Relevance. Your Honour, my attorney responded, the defendant's treatment of the plaintiff establishes a pattern of viewing the plaintiff's assets as her own to control and distribute. It goes to motive. Overruled. Continue, Miss Thorne. I took a breath. I don't hate her. I pity her. She had a daughter who worked hard, who excelled, who asked for nothing but basic acknowledgement. And she couldn't even give me that. Instead, she stole from me, lied to me, and tried to convince me I should be grateful for my own money being spent on everyone but me. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I'm not here for revenge, I said, looking at the judge now. I'm here because $7 million is mine by right, and I intend to use it to build something good, something that helps other kids who feel erased by their families. I'm here because stealing is wrong, even when you steal from your own child. Especially then. When I finished, Linda was crying again, but this time I saw people in the gallery looking at her tears with skepticism rather than sympathy. The judge called a recess, and when we returned 2 hours later, his ruling was swift. I find in favour of the plaintiff, Judge Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. The defendant breached her fiduciary duty as trustee, misappropriated funds designated for the plaintiff's benefit, and engaged in a pattern of financial exploitation. The trust shall be transferred to the plaintiff immediately, along with penalties and legal fees. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution for embezzlement. Linda made a sound like a wounded animal. Victoria buried her face in her hands. Isabella just stared, perhaps finally understanding that actions had consequences. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm granting the plaintiff's request for a restraining order. The defendant and her family members are to have no contact with the plaintiff for a period of no less than 3 years. Robert, I noticed, looked relieved. He'd settled separately, agreeing to make restitution for his negligent oversight and to testify against Linda if criminal charges were filed. Evelyn had negotiated well for him, but he'd also genuinely seemed remorseful when he apologised to me privately before the trial. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell and it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but I was prepared. I stood on the steps, Evelyn at my side, and made a brief statement. Today, justice was served. I'm grateful to the court for recognising the truth. I'm grateful to my father, Robert Thorne, for establishing the trust that secured my future and for supporting the truth in these proceedings. And I'm grateful to Evelyn Thorne, who taught me that strength isn't about being loud, it's about being strategic. I paused, looking directly at the cameras. To anyone who's been told they don't matter, that they're a burden, that they should be grateful for scraps, you're worth more than that. Build your own power, document the truth, and never let anyone convince you that abuse is love. Then I turned and walked away, Evelyn beside me, leaving the chaos of my old life behind. Linda tried to approach me once, breaking the restraining order 6 months later. She was arrested, given a warning, and I never saw her again. The criminal embezzlement case resulted in probation and restitution payments that would take her years to complete. She lost her social standing, her friends, her reputation. Not because of anything I did to her. I never spoke about her publicly after that courthouse statement, but because her own actions, finally visible, destroyed her. Isabella and Victoria both reached out years later. Isabella's message was defensive, claiming she hadn't known about the embezzlement, which might even have been true. Victoria's was more honest. An apology, an acknowledgement that she'd been cruel, a request not for forgiveness, but for understanding that she'd been young and following her mother's lead. I didn't respond to Isabella. I sent Victoria a brief message. I appreciate your apology, I hope you find your own path forward, but we won't be in contact. Forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, and I had learned to protect my peace. 5 years after the trial, I stood in the office of my own venture capital firm, a firm I'd built with my trust fund, with Evelyn's mentorship, with everything I'd learned from being underestimated. We specialised in funding women-led startups, companies founded by people who'd been overlooked by traditional investors. We had a success rate twice the industry average because we knew how to spot hunger, resilience, the kind of determination that comes from having to fight for every inch. Evelyn had invested in my firm, had served as my advisor, but the company was mine. I'd named it Phoenix Ventures because I believed in rebirth, in rising from ashes, in the power of second chances. My office had a wall of windows overlooking the city, and sometimes I stood there in the early morning, watching the sun rise, thinking about the girl I'd been. Both versions of her, the one who died forgotten and the one who'd been reborn with knowledge and determination. I'd built this, not with Linda's money, that had been stolen from me and then returned, but with my own mind, my own work, my own refusal to be erased. I'd built a life where no one could take anything from me because I'd made myself untouchable. My phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Morning, coffee? I have a deal I think you'll want to hear about." I smiled. We had breakfast every Saturday, a tradition that had started during my internship and never stopped. She'd become the mother Linda never was, not warm and cuddly, but honest, demanding, present. She'd given me the greatest gift. She'd believed I was worth investing in. "Yes," I texted back, "the usual place. 20 minutes. I grabbed my coat and headed out, my heels clicking on marble floors, past the reception desk where my assistant was already at work, through the lobby with its modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city hummed with possibility. Somewhere in this city, Linda was living a reduced life, struggling to maintain relevance among people who turned their backs on her. Somewhere, Isabella was probably still making excuses for her failures. Victoria was possibly finding her way, possibly not. And me? I was free. I thought about that moment in my previous life, in the car with Isabella, when I'd realised too late what was happening. I thought about the years of feeling invisible, unwanted, less than. I thought about dying with the belief that I'd never mattered. But I'd been given something rare, a second chance, and I'd used it not for revenge, but for something better. I'd used it to become undeniable. That evening, after a day of meetings and deal negotiations, I returned to my apartment, a penthouse I'd bought myself with my own money, and opened my laptop to write. I'd been documenting my story, not for publication, but for myself. A record of transformation. I wrote, "In my first life, I let them define me. I believed their version of who I was, unwanted, burdensome, forgettable. I shaped myself around their cruelty, trying to become small enough that maybe, finally, they'd make room for me. In this life, I defined myself. I looked at their cruelty and decided it told me nothing about my worth. I built something they couldn't touch, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted freedom. And freedom, I learned, is the best revenge of all. My birth mother spent my childhood trying to erase me. She spent my trust fund on everyone but me. She chose her stepdaughters over her own child, again and again, as if love were a finite resource, and I had already used up my share. But here's what she never understood. You can't erase someone who refuses to disappear. I saved the document and closed my laptop, walking to the windows that overlooked the glittering city. My reflection looked back at me, no longer 16 and frightened, no longer 17 and dying. Just me, at 26, powerful and free. I didn't destroy Linda. I didn't have to. I simply outgrew her. Outgrew the need for her approval, for her acknowledgement, for any piece of the love she'd never been capable of giving. I'd found better people, Evelyn, my colleagues, my chosen family of ambitious, brilliant people who understood that worth was built, not bestowed. My phone buzzed again. A reminder for tomorrow's meeting. A young entrepreneur with a brilliant idea and no connections. Someone who reminded me of myself. Someone worth investing in. I smiled and confirmed the meeting. Because that's what second chances are for. Not just saving yourself, but learning to recognise others worth saving. Not just surviving, but teaching others that they can thrive. Linda had tried to convince me I was nothing without her. But I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I was everything without her. My victory was never revenge. It was becoming untouchable. It was building an empire from the ashes of their cruelty. It was standing in my own space, in my own power, and knowing that no one could take it from me because I'd forged it myself in the fire of their worst intentions. I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves the moment they underestimated me. And I simply stopped looking back. The city lights sparkled below like promises, like possibilities, like proof that sometimes the best response to being erased is to become impossible to ignore. I'd been reborn with knowledge and rage and determination, and I'd transformed all of it into something pure. Power that no one could steal. Success that no one could claim. A future that belonged only to me. My birth mother had tried to hide the secret of my trust fund, to keep me dependent and small. But secrets, once exposed, lose their power. And I had learned to wield truth like a weapon, not to wound, but to liberate. This was my life now. Not the one she tried to script for me, but the one I'd written for myself. And every morning when I woke up, every deal I closed, every woman entrepreneur I funded, I was proving the same thing over and over. My thorn was no one's mistake, no one's burden, no one's forgotten child. My thorn was a force of nature, a self-made success, a woman who looked at death and betrayal and chose to rise instead. And that, I thought, as I turned away from the window and back toward my life, my real life, the one I'd earned, was the only revenge worth having.